Boom. Hello, all my unconventional people out there. I found a fellow Krafchick. Her name's Julie. And I was like researching like other people with the last name Krafchick because I was tired of all these random messages on LinkedIn that I was getting. I was like, you know what? Maybe I'll reach out to people with the same last name and see if I can make any connections. And I found Julie, and she has such an unconventional background. She has a podcast called Dateable. She's been recognized by Oprah Daily and the New York Times, and she has an upcoming book coming out, How to Be Dateable. And apparently Julie knows a lot about dating, relationships, and how to connect in this swipe left, swipe right world. So happy to have Julie on. And how did you fall into this, and how did you make a career out of being dateable?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm so happy to be here and to meet a fellow craft chick. When you reached out, I was like, okay, this is surreal. I've never met another craft chick, so maybe we need to do like 23 and Me at some point and see if
How
there's
is
any
how is that for
connection.
like a pique your interest? It's like, oh, this person has the same
Yeah.
last name. Maybe I'll see what they have to say.
Yeah. It's a great in. But yeah, so how did I get started in this? It is actually something I never set out to be a dating expert ever in my life. Like, in fact, it's something that I struggled with when I was in my 20s. I consider myself maybe like a later bloomer. I was never like the person that had a lot of relationships and dating experience in high school or even college, actually. So it's kind of surreal that I'm sitting here now as a dating expert. I hate using the word expert because it's kind of like a funny term of like, do you just get really good at dating? But I think it's more about like what we've done with Dateable is, study dating and really understand like what's happening in today's world, because we're constantly hearing that dating is so difficult. It's so hard to find. Like you started to say, the swipe right, swipe left culture, like everyone is on to the next. It's just a very challenging place. So I think, how did I get into it? I would say from my own need of wanting to understand more what other people were going through, in starting off as a way to just get these answers to my own questions, and then soon realize that I was not alone, that none of our listeners were alone. We were all in it and experiencing this.
That's so cool. And what is going on with the current culture that is giving so many people issues?
So much. I mean, I think part of it is just we're in uncharted territory, like in the sense of, technology, changing gender roles. Like there's so many factors at play. And I think it's actually a beautiful thing once you really dig under the surface. Like people always ask, like when they find out that me and my co-host do this podcast, they're always like, oh, modern dating's the worst, right? And they always expect us to kind of go along with that. And we're like, actually, like we think it's actually a wonderful thing that we have so much choice and agency, and we don't have to just like fall into relationships or choose that path because that's like what we were told we were supposed to do from a young age. It's really nice that we have all these ways of doing now, but I think with that comes confusion, that people don't know how to navigate it. So there's a lot of just unanswered questions out there and a lot of noise. I would say that's the biggest thing. There's so much noise of all the things you can be doing at a given moment. Sometimes it's just hard to even know where to start.
Yeah, and any relationship takes time,
Yes.
and people don't want to spend time to find the
No.
next person. And it could be like, hey, you go to a workout class every week and you see the same 15 people every week. And then over time, you're like, hey, you seem cool. Let's go do something outside of here. But you have some common interests because you're at the same workout class every week or at the same sporting event. And it seems like a lot of people have gotten away from that sort of way to find a person they want to spend time with.
100%. I think it's like the instantaneous culture. And, we, like you mentioned, we have an upcoming book coming out in January. And this stemmed from the podcast. My co host, Yue, and I have been doing this podcast for almost 9 years at this point. So we're coming up on a decade, which is actually quite nuts when you think about it. Like, I think when we started this, we're like, oh, it'll just be like a fun way to talk to our friends and learn about dating. I don't think we ever realized what it was going to uncover. But a big part of the book is taking all of our knowledge and what we've learned in this almost decade and looking at like what is getting in people's ways. And what we've realized is like modern dating is not set up like for success. Like what you were saying, like a big part of it is what we call like the expectation of love on demand. It's like we think that things are just going to instantly happen because we can get a car or food or anything else in like 5 minutes. So why can't love work the same way?
Why can't it?
Because like it takes time to develop and get to know someone, right? I think that's the part that we expect things to happen so quickly in the swipe culture that we're on to the next. We don't give people time to like show who they really are.
Hmm. Yeah, and the only way to find out who someone really is to see them in real life in some sort of
Yeah,
capacity. I could make any profile look good on the front end, but once you start digging deeper, becomes much harder to hide anything that you're looking to hide from people. Or sometimes people are really bad at creating these profiles, and they're actually better in real life than they are on a screen.
100%.
So with that, like, what's the biggest like first step people could take in this new culture that you recommend taking in the dating world?
I mean, first step, I think it's to recognize all the impacts that are going on, like that are outside of you that might not be like what you really want to be doing. I think there's so many like unwritten rules and ways that we're supposed to date that have just been manifested for years and then kind of taken to new heights with technology and all that's happening in today's world. Like, for instance, just like the linear timeline of dating. Like you're like, I go on the first date, and then by the third date, like we're supposed to like get intimate, and then by the fifth date, we're supposed to define the relationship. Like, where did this stuff come from? Like when you're like meeting up with a friend, you're not like, are we gonna be best friends like on date one? And you're not like, should I define the relationship and have this person be like my one and only BFF? It's just like unraveling a lot of that is a good first step.
Yeah, and I feel like people need to lower their expectations a little bit.
In
There's no perfect
certain
person.
ways. Yes, agree on that, 100%. I think there is, like, this feeling of, like, relation shopping, like we call it, like, with an Amazon effect, and it goes back to that love on demand that you could just pick the perfect person because there's so many options and they're at our fingertips. But that becomes, like, a chooser like, that mindset isn't necessarily what actually matters in a relationship, and then also, you know, it's not like a great place to be coming in on a date of being like, "I have this checklist. Let me see what this person can offer me." It just takes out the connection that is missing in today's world.
Yeah, having a checklist is setting you up for success because no person, regardless of who they are, is going to check every box.
Nope.
However, do you talk about some things that are like non-negotiables to help weave out like certain people? Could you like walk us
Oh,
through that?
100%. I mean, I think that's like the thing that we don't want the message to be like. I think people should be selective of who they spend their life with. It's a huge decision. And like that's what so much is riding on. Like, I think we absolutely should give our time to people that are deserving of our time. It's the problem is though that we're focusing on the wrong characteristics. And part of that is because of apps and this checklist mentality that we're talking about that like when you think about it with apps, like what info do you have? You have, someone's face, you have where they went to college, their height, their distance, like neighborhood they live in, their occupation. And I'm not saying this stuff isn't important, but it's the resume. We don't know if they're a good person. We don't know if there's someone that's like committed and in it and are going to be with you through thick and thin. So I think it's really reframing like what is it that I want into values. And in the book we have like a whole perfect partner equation that we go into that really gets to the root of that. But I think that's something by doing Dateable, we realize that like what people ask for, it's in a way generic too. Like it's all coming from like a societal expectation. And it also makes sense though. Like if, you know, I was going to set up one of your friends, Like, they'd probably be like, "Yeah, I like someone that's well-traveled and brunette," or whatever, because that's easier for me to, like, find that person rather
Mhm.
than, like, "Oh, they have a kind heart and," like, all the stuff, trustworthy. It's like, how would you even know, like, where to start?
Yeah, well, you with anything, you have to get specific, otherwise, it's just like all these choices out there. It's kinda like going to dinner at the Cheesecake Factory, like, you have
Yeah.
all these different choices, and you're like, "What do I want today?" And when you get more specific and when I started to get more specific on what I was looking for, it started narrowing down, like, who I actually wanted to start pursuing rather than, "This person seems cool. She's pretty. Let's go out."
100%. I think too, like a big part of it is knowing what you're looking for. And that goes deeper than what people think. Like, I'm just looking for a relationship or I'm looking for that pretty girl or whatever. Like, it's like, how do you actually want to feel around someone? Like, what do you want a future to look like? It doesn't mean that you can't like have any flexibility once you meet that person. But like, if you want, the family and that lifestyle and then someone else wants to like be non-monogamous and travel the world, like it's going to be hard to make that work. So I think just like understanding what values you're looking for, how you want to feel, and then what a future could look like and operate can set you up with a good foundation.
For sure, and when I was dating my wife, I, like, told her, like, my non-negotiables. I was like, "I am not going to change this for anyone, and you have to be along for the ride, and you have to be cool with this." And she had certain things that she wanted me to be cool with, and here we are, married, coming up on 3 years now, and we moved in together during, COVID, which I like to call the ultimate test.
Absolutely. I'm curious, what were those non-negotiables for you, or one of them if you can share?
Well, one is she had to be okay with me owning my own business and living a more
Mhm.
entrepreneurial life
Yep.
because in the beginning of starting anything, it takes time. And by no means am I in a position where I'm going to start making like a ton of money right now. However, I'm doing all the things today to make our life easier in the future. And that was like one of the biggest ones. I was like, I don't care who it is. Like, I'm not giving this up. Like, either you're along for the ride or
Yeah.
not.
I mean, I think that though is very different than being like, well, they must, have their masters and you don't even have your masters. Like that, I feel like is what we hear a lot. But what you're saying is actually something that's really core to you. And that's like knowing yourself and what's important to you in a partner. And I think leading with that is a great filtering system to make sure the right people are coming through. I think where it becomes problematic is when people have like the checklist of every last thing that's like more of their aspirational qualities that they may hold. Like we've heard of like, the person that ran a half marathon like 5 years ago, but they need to find a fellow runner. And it's like, do you need that? Like, is that so important? But I think like something like what you said, that's so core to you. And of course, like if running was core to you, that'd be a different scenario as well.
Yeah, it's just about having someone who accepts what you're passionate about and allows you to continue doing what you're passionate about. If you love playing golf, they have to be okay with you going to play golf and being gone. Or if
Yeah.
you want to go for a run that's 15 miles and you're going to be gone, like they have to be okay with like you being gone and trusting you that you're doing what you want to do and supporting you in the things that you're passionate about.
Yeah. I mean, I think it even goes deeper of like, it's more of just giving your partner like the respect to be themselves. Like, it doesn't matter what that thing is. It's more of like, I'm going to allow my person to have the space to do what energizes them and fuels them.
Yeah, because you can't do everything together. Even your bestest friend, you still
No,
need time apart.
100%.
So, what is in your book that you could share like that equation? Are you able to share like that equation?
Yeah, I mean, I think I started to allude to it. I mean, there's a lot of like exercise and way to uncover it. So for that, you might have to go into the book, but there's really the three parts of this perfect partner equation. And we kind of start with you need to find your dating North Star. What is it that you're looking for? Like, what is it that you want? And that really unfolds by what's your reason for dating in the first place? What's your dating why? And then also, what are your core needs? Like, what are the things that you absolutely need? In your case, for instance, it was like acceptance. I need to be accepted for what I'm doing and who I am and what I'm trying to do in this world. That's a big one. And then from a dating why perspective, a lot of times we go into like the future of like, I want to be married or I want a partnership. But it's like, what is it that you actually want underneath that? And there's like a good way to like unravel that is by asking why 3 times. So, like, if someone's like, I want a partner, you're like, why? Then they give you that answer, why? And then you keep getting to the root of what it is. It's a 5 whys that's like actually done by like Toyota Corporation. So it's a business thing, but I think it very much applies to understanding your why. But like anything, and I would equate this to business too, you need to find out what's driving you to do something that's beneath just like I should do it or this is what society tells me to do because you're going to burn out really fast if you don't have that core of what's getting you motivated. And then finding the equating that with the needs, that's putting you at the forefront of like this is what I need in a partnership. And I think a lot of women especially because I've been there, we've been trained this way is like you feel almost selfish looking at it this way because it's like we're supposed to be a partnership. But at the same time, I think if you're not thinking about like, what do I need? That's when you end up in a situationship or an unfulfilling relationship where someone's not fully committing or doing what you actually like require to be loved. And, in a way, it's actually just giving someone like a blueprint into how you want to be loved by being able to one identify your needs and then be able to communicate them.
Totally. Dating is pretty much like running a business. In the beginning of business, when you first start, you're like, I'll talk to anyone who's interested.
Yeah.
Then you start creating non-negotiables. You're like, hey, if this person has this mindset or they're not willing to pay for a consultation, like you're automatically going to swipe left on that person. But then if they hit those initial check marks, you're like, all right, let's move them to the next level and
Yeah.
see how they do. What, how would you describe people who have like non-negotiables in terms of like must-haves versus nice-to-haves? Going back
Mhm.
to like that checklist format a lot of people have, is like, oh, this person doesn't have a master's. Sorry, can't talk to you.
Yeah. I think it comes down to that perfect partner equation. You got to it right there of like that first step is that North Star of like, does this person even pass the basic bar for me to like give them more time and attention? Like if they're so wildly off from my needs, like if you want to feel prioritized in a relationship and then someone's not texting you back or being like vague if they want to see you again or like leading you on, but then not committing to actually making plans, is that someone that like you want to invest in further? Probably not because they can't even meet that core need. But then with the perfect partner equation, it's really 3 parts. It's fundamentals, which is taking that checklist and turning it into the values. So instead of saying like I want someone that likes to travel, what does travel mean to you? Because travel actually could mean something different to me than to even you. Like it could mean like I'm self-sufficient or it could mean I'm adventurous. And I think understanding what's underneath that checklist is really important. And having a couple, I think like, I hate using like hard, fast numbers, but I would say like limit to like 5 because like at the end of the day, we've actually had we've had researchers come on our podcast that say like people think they know what they want but they ultimately don't a lot of times. Like they think that there's a certain trait that's so important to them but that's not actually who they end up picking, or it doesn't mean that like someone else could have that more but they're still attracted to the person that they ended up choosing. So I think limiting it to a couple cores a really good way to have that balance between you know being open, but also knowing what you want, because there's also the other 2 parts of the equation, which is feelings and future. So you kind of need to leave all of it. And feeling is really just how do I want to feel around this person?
The hobbies and interests is what's going to open the door. However, if the goal is to say, have a family and you love going out to concerts and traveling the world, and then all of a sudden you have 2 small kids, there's no way you're going to want to travel the world and go to concerts when you have two small kids.
Right.
However, by having someone who wants to work with you in terms of getting through the hard times
Yeah.
to hit those long-term goals, that's really the difference maker.
Yeah. And I think also it's what is the value behind the hobby, because that's what actually stands the test of time, right? It's not going to concerts, but what does that bring out for you that you can share with your partner through all the different life stages?
Yeah, and for example, I love playing golf. It's been like a hobby that I picked up about 7, 8 years ago, and I've been doing it consistently, and it's something fun. I can go outside. I can go to the golf course by myself. I can put in headphones. I don't need to like set up someone else to go play. So it could be just me and outdoor time. And my wife really enjoyed before we were married and had our daughter. She would come out with me and have a drink, drive the golf cart, pick the music, be outside. Like it was like a fun activity for her to do. And she just took me to a golf tournament and we all went together as a family, and we ended up taking more pictures of our daughter than watching golf, but we still went to like a golf event together.
Yeah. That's a really good example of how it can continue on.
So we traveled, stayed with family, and we went to like an outdoor event the whole family could enjoy. Now, was it like my perfect idea of watching a golf tournament? Of course not. But at least I still got to go.
Yeah, definitely.
Better than not going at all. And with that being dateable, what else is like something that people think they want, but then they actually realize they don't want that comes up?
Oh, I mean,
Is
it's
there like a
hard.
common theme? It just reminds me of like the new song that, like, not a new song, but the song that came out, like, I Want a Guy in Finance.
Oh, yeah.
6'5", blue eyes, trust fund.
I mean, I think that's actually a good example because it's like what comes with that, right? It's long work hours. Maybe you're not available as much to go on date nights. So I think it is looking like sometimes we just don't know though until we're in it. So it's kind of hard to answer that question in the sense of like there's not one thing that's standing out, but I think there's a lot of scenarios just like that. Is a lot of times we overcorrect too based on our past. So like let's say you had this ex that was just kind of on again, off again, never knew what to expect, hot and heavy, and then cold and distant. Maybe you overcorrect and you find that more stable person, but then that person feels boring, or you've overcorrected in the sense of I'm only with them because they're stable, not because like you have anything else and other qualities. So I think there's a lot of overcorrection that can happen, but I also think that's just part of the process. Like another big thing that we kind of push in the book too, it's like we think that like we need to get it right on day one because we all just want to get to the end. And that's like a big piece of it with, again, expectation of love on demand. We just want to finish off. But part of it is just like the journey of getting there and looking at dating as a way to understand yourself, understand others, and what you're actually ultimately looking for, and getting the relational skills that many of us are lacking, not because we're not good people, but it's just not what's focused on in society. And that helps you with your long-term relationship when the day finally comes. Not if, but when, because we know it will. It's more just how do you get there and learn what works for you.
Now, the show, this reminds me almost of my wife and I love to watch Love is Blind.
Oh, yes.
Is Love Blind? Is this is that experiment actually a good experiment, or is it more entertainment from your point of view? I'd love to hear like what your thoughts are about that.
I also love that show and watch it religiously with my partner. So with you on that one. I think there is a mix here. I think a lot of it is entertainment, absolutely. But I do think there are some solid things we can take away from it of, just getting to having the time to get to know the person a little more, like through the wall. They develop a deeper emotional bond that I do think is actually missing in modern dating today. A lot of times, like we go into dates with this date talk. We call it the dater view, that you're just trying to figure out what this person's all about so you don't waste time and you can move forward with the right person, make sure they don't have the red flags or give you the ick or any of the stuff. But with Love is Blind, like they had to lean into this time and to really get to know this person and took the physical out, which I think, I do think physical attraction, there needs to be a baseline, absolutely, but I do think it grows through your emotional connection. So I like that part of it. I think the part that kind of gets me is just how fast it is. And of course, there's always a scenario that, someone meets someone immediately, they get married and things go well. But I do think, again, it comes back to like love takes time. Like we want to rush to the end, but it takes time to get to know someone. And especially like going through the different stages with them can actually be really beautiful. And I'm saying this as someone that, has felt like, okay, I just want to get to the end. Like I remember like it took like my partner and I a little more time, that we were on different wavelengths of like when to move in together, because I wanted to move in quicker. But I'm actually glad in retrospect that we took the time, because we went through each stage of the relationship and the relationship depth built a lot because we had that time. So when it actually came time to move in together, it almost felt like we already lived together. So it's very natural. And we didn't really have any of like the issues, quote unquote, that you hear of a lot of first time people moving in together, because we took it a little bit slower. So I think that piece, and then also just this end goal of marriage, like that part, I think is some of the issues I have with Love is Blind.
Yeah, I definitely feel like when they have like the parties and they bring in the other people, and you can tell, like, I don't know what's in there's fancy Netflix cups that all the Netflix shows have, but I'm sure they're having some drinks. So if people are drinking, they see people, and they're like, man, I had this deep emotional connection, but I chose someone else. Then they might see that person like, man, maybe I chose the wrong person. And that's definitely where people in normal society get it wrong too. Like, oh man, I met this like fun, exciting person. I was
Yeah.
out. Maybe I chose the wrong person. It's like, well, you're in a social setting and everyone's
Yeah.
having fun, but
Yeah.
you don't know anything else about that person other than you're all having fun on Broadway in Nashville.
That is always one of the highlights, at least from the drama perspective, of seeing them like reconnect with the other castmates.
Yeah. And how did that conversation go when you were ready to move in, but your partner wasn't? What did that look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a learning experience for myself too. I think a lot of times, and something I also was guilty of, dating feels like this massive process that you have to do. Then when you meet the person, it feels like it should just be easy now and like everything should just work out. And I think overall, my relationship, I would say, is easy. Like on a day to day, we get along very well and, there's not much friction. But that doesn't mean that like we're not two different people with different backgrounds, ways of thinking, thought processes, like ways of acting, all of it that has been ingrained for decades before we met each other. So I think we don't always think about that. And I had to come to terms with that a pace discrepancy is not only one natural, but it's not the end of the world and a deal breaker. And I think it's like how you work together to get through that shows so much more about the relationship. And being able to like navigate through that actually showed like how strong we were in many ways, that made it that we're deciding to take this next step, not just sliding into it.
So how did you work through it to take the next step since you were on different time frames?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a combination of many conversations, eventually having, a couples counselor, third party in the room. And I think a lot of times, that gets a stigma. Like it's funny because like therapy culture, I feel like has actually been pretty mainstream. But when you say like couples therapy, people are like, oh, is your relationship over? But I've been hearing this trend of like a lot more people doing preventative couples therapy, even of just like, I want to have that third person so we can like develop some of these communication skills and the relational skills that weren't there. So having that third person ended up being really instrumental, because I think at a point you're going to hit a block if two people want different things. So having that third person there, and there were times where I would, bring something back to my own stuff from years ago that had nothing to do with my partner, and the therapist being like, "I didn't hear what you just heard," you know? So I think there is a lot of value of that, and, like, actually another thing we talk about in the book that holds people back is what we call the validation trap of how dating and relationships are so tied to our own self-worth. There was a lot of that happening for me that it's something I struggle with when dating, but also even now I can see it creeping in that you're like, "Oh, this person's not ready to take the step. Like, am I not good enough?" And, all that part is really just not a productive way to move forward with something. And like, even in a dating context, like, let's say someone's not into you, like, who cares? Like, that means that, like, they're just clearing your path to find someone that is. I think when we get so hung up with using dating as a way to measure our value, that's when it can just get really difficult.
Yeah, I could see how that could be hard for someone. And with working with people on their business or finances or even on a relationship, I feel like it's important to have rules that you come together and agree to and have these
Mhm.
rules in place so that when a situation comes up, you have these rules in place that you both agreed to. And when something comes up, you abide by the rules, then all is good. And if you break the rules, then it's like, hey, we came up with these rules. What happened that caused you to veer away from what we agreed to? So, like, with me and my wife, we came up with like a rule where we were both saving up for money before we got married. And then she took all the money and like paid for a trip and didn't tell me
Mm,
she'd use that money. Now, it was a small mistake and we haven't made the same mistake again, but we had a conversation around it so that we could avoid making the same mistake twice. Like
yeah.
going back to the you were saying the Toyota rule, which I believe was in the Lean Startup book. Why
Mhm.
did this happen? Well, why did that happen? And then asking why 3, 4, 5 times.
Yeah.
Do you have any rules with your partner that you've agreed to help make sure your relationship doesn't get off track?
I'm not sure if we have rules as much, but we do relationship check-ins every week and swear by that. And that really is a place where for 30 minutes, and it's actually a time that we both look forward to. It's not like a dreaded, like, oh my God, we have to talk about the relationship. But we ask like a few simple questions. Like what went well for you this week? What didn't? Which is more just about, not that we're not having these questions day to day living together, but it's a good chance to hear your partner and what they're going through and maybe something they didn't really bring up in the moment. And then the next parts are important of like what's a hot damn or something that you appreciate about your partner, but then also what's a relational growing itch. And I think that one's really important for us because it gives space to bring up things that instead of letting them fester. So like things that, maybe aren't a big deal at all. Like, I remember, like, my partner was like, "Can you, make sure that this dish is away?" And it's like, "Okay, that's fine. That's not a big deal." But if that sat and built resentment for months, then it becomes a problem. So I think having these check-ins to get to the root of what's going on in the moment, fairly in the moment within the week, and then also address them when they're small and not mountains, it just makes the relationship more manageable.
Do you remember what the last item you festered about with your partner?
Oh, what was it? I mean, I think like this is a way to get like little things out. I'm trying to think what the last one was. I think there's just like little like misalignments. And this is again back to something that I feel like I didn't really think about when I was dating. But when I was in like a long term relationship, you're like, oh, yeah, like there are like things that are hard that aren't like problems, but it's hard. Just the way someone operates is different than yours. We often have like time management, I guess is a good way to put it. Like, I'll be like, "Yeah, like, let's go at 4," and then, like, 4:15 rolls around, and, like, I'm still, like, doing something, and to me, I'm like, "Oh, it's not, like, urgent that we went at 4." But I had said that, so for him, he's someone that likes to have more, like, boundaries and, know what's happening in the moment. So to him, that's an annoyance. So I think bringing that up makes me be like, okay, actually, like, while it's not essential we go at 4, this actually means a lot to my partner. So I'm going to think about it differently, or either set the expectation that, like, let's go between 4 and 4:15, for instance. And it sounds so like trivial saying it. And I think, like, in my mind, like, I was like, who cares? Like, these are all like little things. But the reality is, to someone else, they might actually be bigger things. And that's part of being in a relationship. It's not all about us anymore.
It's all about adapting. So
Yep.
just be like, hey, instead of saying 4, be like, hey, I'll be ready between 4:15 and 4:45.
Yeah.
And it's like, hey, now I have wiggle room. I have margin of error. And it's the same thing with dating. It's the same thing with investing, putting in a margin of error of just in case you're a little bit off on your calculation, then that way that proper expectations been set. It's like, hey, I said between this time. I didn't say exactly at 4 o'clock on the dot. We got to be out the door ready to roll.
Yeah.
And it's amazing you took a podcast, 9 years in the making, probably hundreds and hundreds of episodes, and transformed it in the book.
Mhm.
When's the book coming out? And walk us through the evolution of how a podcast turned into a book for anyone out there who might be scared to get started.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I would say that writing ended up being like a complete labor of love for me. So I was really happy with just the whole process and being able to flesh out ideas a little more. Because, like, in the podcast, you're having all these conversations, but sometimes it's hard to see the common themes and what's happening at a higher level. So, writing a book, writing in general, I think is the best way to actually start to have like that like thought leadership and to develop those practices. So I'm really glad for that alone. I got the opportunity to write a book. The book is coming out in January 28th. So it will be here right in time for the new year and for Valentine's Day, the perfect reset for love. And yeah, it's just been a real pleasure. I think it's been fun to co-write the book with my partner, my longest life partner, my podcast co-host. We've been doing this now, again, like I mentioned, for a decade, which is nuts. But taking that and, figuring out like like any partnership, like what are some of the strengths I have, what are the strengths she has, and how do we work together to make this the best book possible? That was a process in its own. And I think because there were two of us, it ended up being a better book in that process.
No matter what it is, starting a podcast, dating, writing a book, building a business, there's levels and steps that you have to take. And if you attempt to skip steps, then there's typically some sort of blow up in the way. So
I mean, yeah, I think that's a big part too, is like 9 years ago, we could not have written this book. We needed to do this for 9 years to get to where we were.
yeah, you got to put in the reps. Julie, so great to have you. Everyone check out the book that's single or knows a single person out there. How to Be
Yes.
Dateable, coming out January 2025. We'll see everyone next time. Bye, everyone.